Welcome to your personalized deep dive into today's top news.
We've sifted through a mountain of information to bring you the most important and insightful stories.
From climate and the environment
To politics.
and energy,
Get ready for a whirlwind tour of burning questions and breaking news.
from wildfires raging in LA,
To a political shakeup in Washington that could impact your gas prices.
it's fascinating how these seemingly disparate events connect
To reveal a global struggle.
to balance energy needs with environmental concerns and economic realities.
Absolutely.
Let's start with those devastating wildfires in Los Angeles.
Thousands of homes have been destroyed.
And tragically, lives have been lost.
What's the latest on the investigation into the cause?
Well,
The situation is complex,
okay.
while the notorious Santa Ana whines.
Known for fanning flames, aren't
Yeah.
directly linked to climate change.
Their impact is exacerbated by the increasingly dry conditions.
I see.
A recent study by World Weather Attribution.
A group that analyzes the role of climate change in extreme weather events
Exactly.
found that Southern California is now experiencing 23 more fire-prone days each year.
This dryness, coupled with the extreme heat we've seen this year, creates a tinderbox-like situation.
Wow.
The study directly links this increased dryness to climate change,
So climate change is essentially acting as a force multiplier.
making these wildfires more frequent and more severe.
Exactly.
And this raises an important question.
Okay.
California is considering legislation that would hold oil and gas companies financially responsible for climate change-related damages like these wildfires.
It's a bold move.
Attempting to directly connect the dots between fossil fuel emissions and the costs of climate-driven disasters.
Could this strategy actually work?
Holding oil and gas companies liable for the impacts of climate change seems like a long shot.
Yeah.
It's certainly a novel legal strategy, and it's gaining traction in several states.
Interesting.
Senator Weiner, who introduced the bill,
Okay.
argues that fossil fuel companies have known for decades that their products contribute to climate change.
And have continued to prioritize profits over the safety of the planet.
Right.
His argument hinges on the precedent of holding utilities accountable for wildfire damage caused by their equipment.
Precisely.
That's a pretty big comparison.
Could this argument actually hold up in court?
Yeah.
It will undoubtedly be a fierce legal battle.
I imagine so.
Oil and gas companies are pushing back hard,
Arguing that their products are legally sold.
and that consumers are ultimately responsible for the emissions.
They're essentially shifting the blame down the chain.
This raises a fundamental question about where responsibility truly lies in the face of climate change.
And who should ultimately bear the cost of its devastating impacts.
Exactly.
Speaking of battles, let's move to the political arena.
Where the Senate just confirmed Doug Burgum as the new Interior Secretary.
This appointment seems to have sent shockwaves through the environmental community.
What's the significance of this move? Burgum is a well-known advocate for the fossil fuel industry, and his appointment signals a clear shift in federal policy towards increased domestic drilling on public lands.
President Trump has tasked him with boosting U.S. oil and gas production as part of his energy dominance agenda.
This puts him directly at odds with environmental groups
Who are deeply concerned about the potential impacts on sensitive ecosystems.
and the acceleration of climate change.
So we could be looking at a potential oil boom under the new administration.
But at what cost?
It seems like a classic case of short-term gains versus long-term consequences.
That's a crucial point.
While the administration is focused on boosting domestic fossil fuel production, other countries are moving in a very different direction.
China, for example, just installed a record amount of wind and solar power last year.
Surpassing their 2030 target a full 6 years ahead of schedule.
That's incredible.
It seems like China is racing ahead in the clean energy transition, while the U.S. is doubling down on fossil fuels.
Isn't this a risky strategy for the U.S. in the long run?
Well, it's a question many are asking.
China is investing heavily in renewable energy manufacturing and deployment.
Positioning themselves as a global leader in the energy transition.
This raises a critical question.
As the world moves towards cleaner energy,
Will the U.S. risk falling behind both economically and technologically?
it's not just China that's making strides in clean energy.
What about Europe?
They've been at the forefront of climate action.
But there are rumblings of a potential backtrack on green regulations.
What's going on there?
The European Commission, under President Ursula von der Leyen,
Okay.
is considering simplifying environmental reporting laws for companies.
While the stated goal is to ease compliance costs and boost competitiveness,
The move has sparked concern among environmental groups
they see it as a potential weakening of the EU's commitment to climate action.
and a sign that economic interests might be trumping environmental concerns.
So even Europe
often seen as a bastion of environmentalism.
is grappling with the economic realities of the green transition.
It seems like there's a global tug-of-war going on,
Between the urgency of addressing climate change.
and the economic pressures of maintaining growth and competitiveness.
Absolutely.
This situation underscores the inherent tension between economic growth, environmental protection, and political will.
It's a balancing act that every nation, regardless of its stance on climate change, is struggling to manage.
Let's shift gears and talk about another political appointment.
This one with a much different background.
Lee Zeldin, the former New York congressman, has just been confirmed to head the Environmental Protection Agency.
The EPA.
This seems like a major departure from his previous roles.
Zeldin's appointment has taken many by surprise given his limited experience in environmental policy.
However, he's known to be a staunch Trump ally.
And many anticipate he'll align with the administration's agenda of weakening environmental regulations.
And potentially shrinking the EPA's workforce.
So it seems like the EPA might be headed for a major shakeup under his leadership.
And what about those deferred resignation packages being offered to EPA employees?
That doesn't sound very promising.
These packages are part of a broader restructuring effort within the EPA.
Many see them as a tactic to reduce the agency's capacity to enforce environmental regulations.
Effectively weakening it from within.
The result is likely to be significant staff reductions.
Potentially hindering the EPA's ability to fulfill its mission of protecting human health and the environment.
So we have a new Interior Secretary pushing for oil and gas.
A new EPA head potentially rolling back regulations.
And an executive order putting a halt to offshore wind projects.
That's a lot of change in just 2 weeks.
What does this all mean for the future of U.S. climate policy?
It's clear that the Trump administration is taking a drastically different approach to climate and energy policy compared to its predecessors.
The focus is on energy dominance and deregulation, with significantly less emphasis on climate action.
This sets the stage for potential conflicts with states like California,
which are forging ahead with their own ambitious climate policies.
Exactly. It's fascinating how this clash between federal and state policies is playing out in a country that's supposed to be united on these crucial issues.
But let's broaden our perspective.
And look at how other countries are tackling the energy transition.
Norway, for example, a major oil and gas producer, just hit a remarkable milestone.
9 out of 10 cars sold, there are now electric vehicles.
9 out of 10.
That's an incredible statistic.
We know that EVs are gaining popularity, but that level of adoption is astounding.
What's their secret? Are Norwegians simply more environmentally conscious than the rest of the world?
Right.
It's not just about environmental awareness.
Right.
The Norwegian government has implemented a series of incentives to make EVs more attractive to consumers.
They've introduced tax breaks and subsidies that make EVs more affordable.
And they've invested heavily in charging infrastructure to ensure that drivers have easy access to charging stations across the country.
They've essentially removed the barriers to EV adoption.
Exactly.
So Norway's success demonstrates that with the right policies and investments, a rapid transition to electric transportation is entirely possible.
It's a model that other countries could certainly learn from.
But while Norway embraces EVs, the UK is facing a legal battle over oil and gas production.
A Scottish court just halted drilling at 2 North Sea sites
until the government reassesses the project's climate impact.
This ruling seems to have significant implications for the future of fossil fuel development.
This ruling sets a crucial precedent.
It holds governments accountable for their climate commitments.
The court found that the UK government failed to adequately consider the climate impact of burning the oil and gas extracted from these sites.
This runs counter to its legally binding net zero emissions target.
So it's a major victory for climate activists,
who argue that new fossil fuel projects are simply incompatible with a future where we avoid the worst impacts of climate change.
It's certainly a win for the climate movement.
But it also exposes the tension between energy security, economic interests, and environmental concerns.
The companies involved in these projects argue that they're essential for maintaining the UK's energy independence and creating jobs.
This case highlights the complex balancing act that countries face as they grapple with the transition to a cleaner energy future.
And this balancing act becomes even more challenging in regions like Africa,
where energy needs are growing rapidly, but they're grappling with outdated grid infrastructure.
How is the clean energy transition playing out in a continent facing such unique challenges?
Africa's energy landscape is incredibly complex,
Many countries are rich in renewable energy resources,
such as solar, wind, and geothermal.
but lack the necessary grid infrastructure to transmit and distribute electricity effectively,
This limits their ability to harness clean energy and expand access to electricity.
particularly in rural areas where the need is greatest.
Exactly.
So it's not just about generating clean energy.
It's about having the infrastructure in place to deliver it to the people who need it most.
It sounds like a major investment is needed to modernize Africa's energy grid.
African leaders are calling for increased investment in grid modernization to unlock the continent's vast renewable energy potential and achieve energy security.
It's a reminder that the global energy transition requires more than just technological advancements.
It requires a comprehensive approach that addresses infrastructure policy and investment needs,
It's about building a system that is both sustainable and equitable.
ensuring that everyone has access to clean and affordable energy.
Speaking of innovative solutions,
There's a growing trend in urban areas that's aiming to address both food security and sustainability,
urban farms.
with office vacancy rates still high in many cities.
Some entrepreneurs are transforming empty buildings into indoor farms.
Bringing fresh food production right into the heart of urban centers.
What's driving this trend?
These open farms are utilizing cutting-edge technologies like hydroponics and vertical farming techniques to grow a variety of crops in controlled environments,
They can produce fresh, locally grown food year-round.
reducing transportation costs and emissions,
They can even play a role in managing stormwater runoff.
making cities more resilient to climate change.
It sounds like a brilliant idea, bringing fresh food closer to urban populations, while simultaneously promoting sustainable practices and reducing our environmental footprint.
While the concept is promising, some challenges need to be addressed.
Indoor farms require significant energy inputs for lighting and climate control, and they may not be suitable for growing all types of crops.
The economic viability and scalability of these urban farms are still being explored.
So it's not a perfect solution, but it's an innovative approach to address the challenges of food security and resource management in rapidly growing urban environments.
But even as we seek out cleaner and more sustainable solutions, we need to be mindful of potential unintended consequences.
Take, for example, the growing demand for lithium.
A critical mineral for batteries used in EVs and renewable energy storage.
The extraction of lithium can have a significant impact on ecosystems.
And we're seeing pushback against a proposed lithium mine near Ash Meadows National Wildlife Refuge in Nevada.
How do we balance the need for these minerals with the imperative to protect our natural environment?
The Ash Meadows case highlights the difficult choices we face as we transition to a clean energy future.
Lithium is essential for battery production, but its extraction can have substantial environmental impacts.
Particularly on water resources and sensitive habitats.
This dilemma underscores the need for a holistic approach to the clean energy transition.
So it's not just about switching to renewable energy sources.
It's about ensuring that the entire supply chain for these technologies is sustainable and ethical.
We need to minimize the environmental impact of mining these essential minerals.
And we need to explore alternative battery technologies that reduce our reliance on lithium or other potentially problematic materials.
It seems like every step forward in the clean energy transition brings new challenges and ethical dilemmas to the forefront.
That's the reality of navigating complex systems.
There are no easy answers.
It requires ongoing dialogue, collaboration, and a willingness to adapt and learn as we uncover the impacts of our choices.
This process involves stakeholders from all sectors,
Governments, industries, scientists, and communities.
working together to find solutions that balance economic development, environmental protection, and social equity.
And speaking of adaptation, let's look at a region that's already feeling the impacts of climate change.
Vermont.
They've been hit with severe flooding in recent years.
And now communities are taking steps to prepare for a future with more extreme rainfall events.
What are they doing to build resilience in the face of these growing climate risks?
Vermont's story is a microcosm of what many regions are facing as climate change intensifies.
They're restoring floodplains to absorb excess water, strengthening infrastructure to withstand heavier rainfall, and even buying out properties in high-risk areas to relocate residents to safer ground.
They're essentially redesigning their communities to accommodate the changing climate realities.
So it's a combination of mitigation
Reducing the risks,
and adaptation.
learning to live with the unavoidable impacts of climate change.
It's a proactive approach to building resilience in the face of a changing climate.
Precisely.
Vermont's experience offers valuable lessons for other communities facing similar challenges.
Preparing for climate change requires a multifaceted approach that considers both the natural environment and human infrastructure.
It requires long-term planning investment and a willingness to embrace change,
And it highlights the fact that climate change is not just an environmental issue.
but a social, economic, and political issue as well.
It affects every aspect of our life.
It certainly does.
It's a reminder that climate change is not just a scientific or environmental issue,
It's also a social and political issue
with far-reaching implications.
for every aspect of our lives.
And speaking of far-reaching impacts,
Let's turn our attention to a story that's literally making waves in the Southern Ocean.
a giant iceberg known as A23A.
Is heading towards South Georgia Island in Antarctica,
This iceberg is colossal.
roughly the size of Rhode Island,
It broke away from the Antarctic ice shelf back in 1986.
but has been grounded for decades,
Now it's on the move again.
drifting towards South Georgia Island.
And this raises concerns about the potential impact on the island's fragile ecosystem.
What could happen if this massive iceberg collides with the island?
The consequences could be significant.
Okay.
It could disrupt wildlife habitats.
Particularly for penguins and seals that rely on the island for breeding and feeding grounds.
It could also alter ocean currents and disrupt the delicate balance of the marine ecosystem.
Potentially affecting fishing activities in the region.
Exactly.
So it's a situation scientists will be monitoring closely.
It's a reminder of the interconnectedness of our planet, how events in one part of the world can have ripple effects across the globe.
And this brings us to another story that highlights the interconnectedness of climate change, politics, and economics.
President Trump's decision to impose tariffs on imported crude oil from Canada and Mexico.
Has raised concerns about potential increases in gas prices.
It's a move that has many scratching their heads.
The stated goal of tariffs is typically to protect domestic industries.
But in this case,
Some oil refineries in the U.S. rely on imported crude oil to supplement domestic production.
if those imports become more expensive due to tariffs,
Those increased costs can be passed on to consumers at the pump.
right.
So instead of protecting American consumers, these tariffs could actually hurt them by driving up gas prices.
It's a complex issue with potential ramifications for both the energy sector and household budgets across the country.
And it's yet another example of how decisions made in Washington can have a direct impact on the daily lives of Americans.
It highlights the challenges of navigating the energy landscape in today's world.
It requires a deep understanding of global markets, geopolitical dynamics, and the interconnectedness of our energy systems.
Policy decisions in one area can have far-reaching and often unintended consequences in others.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from wildfires in LA to political appointments in Washington, from China's clean energy surge to a massive iceberg on the move.
It's clear that the world is facing a complex and interconnected set of challenges.
But what does it all mean for us?
What can we take away from this whirlwind tour of current events?
The key takeaway is this.
We're in the midst of a profound global transition.
The way we produce and consume energy is changing. The impacts of climate change are becoming increasingly evident.
And the political landscape is shifting in response to these emerging realities.
These changes are happening on a global scale, and they're happening right now.
It's a time of uncertainty.
But also a time of tremendous opportunity.
So where do we go from here?
What can we as individuals do in the face of these global shifts and challenges?
Well, the challenges are significant.
Individual actions multiplied across communities and nations can have a profound impact.
We can advocate for policies that support clean energy and sustainable practices.
We can reduce our own carbon footprint through our energy consumption choices and transportation habits.
We can support businesses and organizations that are committed to environmental responsibility.
And perhaps most importantly, we can stay informed, engaged, and active in shaping the future we want to see.
It's a reminder that even amidst the complexities of global politics, economics, and environmental change, individual choices matter.
We have the power to make a difference,
Both in our own lives
and in the world around us.
and on that empowering note.
We wrap up today's deep dive. Thank you for joining us on this journey through today's top news stories.
Remember, staying informed is the first step towards positive change.
And until next time, keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep diving deep.